All right, let us get started. Welcome. By way of introduction, my name is Justin. I am an audit transformation manager here at DataSnipper. I have a few years experience within the audit space. And yeah, I really enjoyed my time as an auditor. And part of that process is really trying to find some efficiency, find some areas that you can really leverage off what has been done before you, but try and aim to improve the way that things are done. And through that process, I actually stumbled upon DataSnipper, brought the tool into my national audit office back in South Africa, and was quite involved in bringing that efficiency into that audit process. So I'm hoping that today I can bring some of that time investment from my side into today's conversation and see how we can incorporate DataSnipper specifically into the accounts receivable testing portion of the audit approach. On the call today with us is Rodrigo. He is one of my colleagues, and he will be assisting with any of the questions that come through. So please feel free to pose your questions. Any questions you have, obviously, ideally DataSnipper related and or accounts receivable related, and we'll be able to address those throughout today's session. Our agenda today is to start off by running through a brief understanding of what is DataSnipper as a tool, as a product. So if you are not familiar with DataSnipper, you're in the right seat. And then most of our time today is going to be actually looking at auditing accounts receivables, and then more specifically looking at how we can incorporate DataSnipper into that process. We like to always kick off our discussions with an understanding of who is on the call and how familiar are you with the tool. So I'm going to quickly launch a poll within Zoom. This will help me ascertain how fast I should be going through all the different features of DataSnipper. Obviously, if we do have everyone on the call who's intimately familiar with the tool, we can skim through the nitty-gritty. However, if we do have a whole bunch of people who aren't as familiar, we might want to then focus a little bit more on the back end. All right, and thank you very much for those responses. I'm going to launch that and share those results with everyone so you can see who your colleagues on today's call are. It looks like most people are in that expert or user curious to learn more phase, which is perfect. It means we can skim through some of the more basic features and spend more of our time on the automation elements and see how we can actually add that value. Also is good to note that today's session is targeted towards more of an intermediate level DataSnipper user. So everyone on the call seems to be in that category, which is great. Brief introduction to what is DataSnipper. I think everyone does know that on today's call, but it's always nice to recap. So DataSnipper is a plugin for Excel. It is designed with auditors in mind, and so for that reason, it makes sense to include it within the Excel program that most of us work in when we perform our documentation. It's also interesting to note that we have just over 500,000 users globally, most of which are in the external audit space. And we do often interact with those auditors to try and get improvement feedback and areas where we can improve our product. So we are always iterating through that and trying to get the best possible product for the audit approach. Why do we want to incorporate DataSnipper into, I suppose, any element of the audit approach, but for today's call specifically, incorporate DataSnipper into accounts receivable? And we're really going to try and always focus on two keywords, and that is around the efficiency and around the quality. So DataSnipper as a tool has been designed to get the work done faster. We can automate a large portion of the actual performance of the work, especially the repetitive portion that comes with ticking and bashing samples. So we definitely are aiming to improve the efficiency, and today's use case is really going to showcase that quite a lot. Then the second element is around the quality. Because of the fact that DataSnipper implicitly has a cross-referencing feature, it means you can improve the quality of your documentation and the cross-reference to the source of your documentation that much easier. This helps you as the preparer actually prepare a good quality working paper, but it also really assists in, your reviewer in reviewing the work that you have actually performed, allowing them to spend more of their mental energy focusing in on the complexity of the actual audit, which is why we are auditors at the end of the day. Diving into some nitty-gritty for accounts receivable testing, very high-level understanding. Today, we're not going to be doing a deep dive into accounts receivable as an audit financial statement area, but we are going to briefly highlight the key risk areas that we would expect to see. So the audit assertions, we have existence, valuation, completeness, and then rights and obligations. From the existence side, we really are thinking about the question here of, does the balance at year end actually exist? Irrespective of the number, does the debtor actually owe you any money? Are they real? So that's the existence elements. The valuation is then more specifically looking at the value of that. Is the amount correct? Once we have checked that the data does actually exist, that they are a real data, we haven't made them up, we then need to double check, well, how much do they owe you? That incorporates the element of the actual, I suppose I'm from South Africa, so Rand value that they owe you, so they owe you 100 Rand. But then the second element of that valuation assertion is taking a look, well, how much do you expect to receive? So not just thinking about the what are you legally entitled to, but also what do you expect to receive. And we need to remember to take into account that allowance for doubtful debts in between those two values. We then have the completeness risk. This is usually a lower risk element for most companies. Obviously, every company will have its own risk profile. But for most companies, the completeness risk is on a lower end of the risk spectrum. And here we're concerned whether or not our client is actually recording all of their debtors. And then finally, we have rights and obligations. This is a double check to see, does your client actually have the legal authority and the control over those assets, the receivable. And the key element here is they may have ceded those rights to a third party, which means that the actual obligation doesn't, or the rights don't sit with our client. Those are really classically the four audit assertions that we would expect to see when auditing accounts receivable. The two focus ones are around the existence and valuation for most clients. Obviously, again, every client is going to be slightly different, but most of the time we have a risk that the debt, the assets value is going to be overstated, and therefore the risk will lie mostly with the existence and the valuation. It's always interesting for me, how do you and your approach personally, but also from an audit firm, how would you focus on auditing existence and valuation? So I'm going to launch a small poll here. If you can just type a quick response there, we'll see what pops up in the response. And I'll pause here for, I suppose, 10, 15 seconds. All right, yeah, I see some good responses coming in around confirmations, bank statements, yeah, some discussions around the valuation policy. Okay, quite common responses coming through for most participants. Yeah, I suppose the approach for auditing accounts receivable is quite globally standard, which is lucky. And what we're going to do today is then I'm going to present kind of my idea of how I would want to classically audit existence and valuation. It seems like most participants on today's call would agree on a very similar approach. Firstly, I'd want to trace those through to positive confirmations. I just am specifying the positive confirmation side because confirmations can be deemed to be either negative or positive. Positive is stronger audit evidence. So this is where the external debtor actually needs to verify that amount for it to be deemed to be audit evidence. So that's the positive confirmations. Then we want to also or trace to subsequent receipts. So ideally, if the debtor is actually making payment for whatever our client is claiming they owe us, well, then that debtor most likely does exist and the valuation is most likely appropriate. It is important to remember you do still have to test for that recoverability. So although we can claim that the debtor owes us, I was mentioning 100 Rand earlier, at year end, we might only expect to receive, say, 90 because the debtor is experiencing financial distress or whatever the case is. So it's important to remember to test for that recoverability. And so some procedures that I might want to run through, more detailed procedures, to test those three elements. Number one would be to obtain that age analysis and test for the recoverability of the IPE. So the key element here is focusing on you have received information from the client. You want to use that for your audit performance. And you need to, before you can actually use that as your starting point, you have to test whether or not that is relevant information and reliable for your approach. Once you're happy with that, you will select a sample of your debtors and trace that through to positive confirmations and or subsequent receipts. So really the core part of that audit work comes through in that third bullet point. Then remembering that step back and testing the allowance, we're going to be obtaining the allowance policy, assessing that for reasonability, and then recalculating the write-off allowance. Important to note here, this is usually an area which requires more management bias, management judgment, and estimation in whether or not the debtor is going to be paying you or paying your client, excuse me. And so for that reason, this is usually a higher risk area. DataSnipper doesn't necessarily directly address those high risk areas. However, it does really assist you in the documentation of your audit work. So we'll see how that comes in, but it is important to note that we're not going to be teaching you exactly how to test estimations, and you will still need to apply your own firm's methodology towards those types of approaches. Let's then get into the nitty-gritty. We've had a brief introduction into what accounts receivable is going to look like. Let's spend the rest of our today's session actually running through the specifics. So if you will move with me to your downloads folder, you should have downloaded it, the information at this stage. You can see it should come through as a zip folder. Just make sure that you right click on that and extract. Once you have done that, it should come through as an unzip folder. You can open that up. With this, we've got two different documents. At any stage, you're more than welcome to open up that solution and you can see what that end product is ultimately going to be looking like. But for today's session, let's work our way through those training files. You can see these are numbered or lettered A through to D. So we're going to be working through these working papers. They're ultimately all the same working paper. I've just split it into 4 separate sections so that if you get lost along the way, or if you miss 1 or 2 steps, you can catch back up when we move to that next section. So starting with first one, number A or letter A, we can open up that Excel document. All right. Now I want to pause and just familiarize ourselves quickly with the actual working paper. There is a lot that we're going to be working through, and the working paper can be a little bit overwhelming as we run through it. So I would like to first familiarize ourselves with the layout of this working paper. So let's close that document viewer, and we're going to quickly understand. We've got a client, Easy Cheesy BV, with the year end of 31st of December 2022. We've got some materiality figures, and then we have the objective of this working paper. So the objective for this particular working paper is to obtain reasonable assurance over the existence and the valuation of accounts receivable. How are we going to do that? And that's addressed in the procedure section. We've got 6 quite detailed procedures, and we're going to be slowly working through these step by step. So you can see number 1, we've got a whole bunch of procedures within number 1, and we will continue on down the line. The results of those procedures will be summarized under the results section as we complete those. We have a legend section just below for because we are going to be using keys throughout our audit work. And then we've got our conclusion at the end, which is going to hopefully be that reasonable assurance over the existence and valuation of accounts receivable has been obtained. That's the approach for the audit work. You can see I have highlighted one of the procedures in yellow. This is because this is going to be the focus of DataSnipper's features in this particular section for today. So we're going to start with section number 1 or procedure number 1. You can see that we have a new tab for you labeled number 1. So if you navigate to that tab, you can see that those same procedures come through again, this time only presenting procedure number 1. Now we're going to run through this slowly. The first portion is to obtain the accounts receivable age analysis as at year end at an invoice level consolidated per debtor. This is just essentially obtain the age analysis. As you scroll down, you can see that we've already given that through to you. If you click on cell C30 or C29, that's going to open up your document viewer and show you that we have extracted the debtor's age analysis which you received using a table snip. I'm not going to dive into exactly how to use a table snip, but you can see that that has been extracted for you into your Excel. for now, let's keep that closed. So I'm going to go to DataSnipper and hide my document viewer by clicking on Viewer and disable automatic opening. This means that even if I click on those cell references, my document viewer won't open, and I can work with Excel as I normally would. Now, I just want to briefly familiarize you with this particular layout of the data's age analysis. We requested this at the invoice level. So what that means is your data is going to be duplicated. It's not an age analysis per data, it's an age analysis per invoice. So here you can see customer A at year end has 2 outstanding invoices with the dates as noted and the transaction total. And that has been aged into the different aging buckets, either current, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, 90 to 120, or greater than 120. This is going to be a little bit going to make sense as to why we requested the age analysis at an invoice level a little bit down the line, but it is important that the way that you receive the information from your client makes sense for the type of audit procedure you're going to be performing. All right, so we've received the data's age analysis and we've extracted that into our Excel. The first sections 1A is to cast and cross-cast to ensure the mathematical accuracy of the schedule. And really the focus of this first section, number 1, is to obtain the information from the client and make sure we can work with it. We're going to be testing that IPE, which stands for information prepared by the entity, or you might be more familiar with the abbreviation PBC, which is prepared by the client. So section A, we want to make sure that the information does cast and cross-cast, or foot and cross-foot, depending on what region you're from. If you scroll all the way through to the right-hand side, you can see that in column N, we have given you a formula to double check that the information does cast and cross-cast. This is just a normal Excel formula, which is why I'm not focusing too much attention on it. But you can see that we have given that for you and made sure that the information does cast. Down at the bottom in row 110, we have also double checked that the information does, sorry, this one's cast. The column N was cross-casting. So we've picked procedure number A, moving on to procedure B. That's going to be the focus of our work. So let's pause on that one for a second, just double check that we have completed number C, where we're going to reconcile the total to the trial balance amount, obtaining and validating any reconciling items. You can see that the transaction total comes through in column H. So as you scroll all the way to the bottom of this, we've totaled that in cell H112. And then we compare that to the trial balance. And luckily for us, there's no reconciling items. So the information does match to our trial balance. Now at this stage, we've tested our age analysis. However, we haven't yet validated that the information included in the age analysis is actually accurate. And this brings us back to point B, where we need to test that IPE. So we want to confirm that correct aging of the schedule. And we're going to be doing that in 4 steps. So step number 1 and 2 is all around the sample. Now it's important to note DataSnipper doesn't require you to use any particular sampling methodology or approach to your sampling. You are going to apply your own firm's methodology in selecting your sample size and then subsequently selecting the actual sample. So 1 and I and II are really around those items. We have performed that for you, and in column O, we have your sample included. So you can see we've got a sample of 5 items included in column O, noted by the word sample. Then we get into the core focus of what DataSnipper is going to assist us with in this section, where we're going to agree the sampled items to the invoice to confirm the correct date. Really, the idea is you've received the age analysis and you need to confirm that the information included in the age analysis, or the key pieces of information that's included in the age analysis, is accurate. Most specifically being the date and the amount. Are those actually valid pieces of information? Once you have confirmed that the date and the amount are appropriate, you can then age those appropriately and double check that these have been aged into the correct categories. So that's what we're going to do now. We've selected that sample and we want to trace that through to the supporting evidence to make sure that the date and the amount is accurate. We've selected that sample, we sent that sample back to the client, and the client has sent us back the information we required. So let's use some of DataSnipper's features to load that supporting evidence in. If you go to DataSnipper you can click on your organize button and you can go into the confirmations grouping. So we've already given you those folders. You go into that confirmations group, you can see that that is currently empty. So we want to load those confirmations in. Clicking on the bottom left-hand portion of the screen, the blue button which says to import documents, we are going to import our invoices. Highlighting all 5 of those invoices, you can click on open. That will load your invoices in. You can note that these are then presenting the size of those documents, the status in terms of whether or not optical character recognition has been run, the number of snips, and what folder they are currently included in. You can click on OK. I do want to note here, just in case you are on a slightly older version of DataSnipper, you won't be able to see the organize button. My apologies for that. I unfortunately won't be able to assist at this current stage. You might be on a slightly older version. For you, just at this point, load your documents as you normally would. When we get to the document matching, your approach will be slightly different. All right, for the rest of us, if you are on the same version as me, we should then have loaded the documents and included them in the appropriate folder. Let's close the document viewer. Now what we want to do is we want to trace these items through to the supporting information. We need to validate the date and the transaction total. And I suppose the unique identifier here is going to be that reference as well, as those 3 pieces of information are really going to help us confirm that the information in our age analysis is accurate. So we're going to be tracing that sample through to the data to those invoices, and any time that those facts are in play, we can probably use the automation feature around document matching. Let's click on document matching. We'll open up those settings, and we're going to start new document matching. Top right-hand portion, we got the blue button which says start a new document matching. You can click on OK. This is a 3-step process, so we're going to quickly run through that 3-step process. Step number 1 is to select your sample data. If you highlight your reference, that is then going to be noting that as one of your sample items. That's going to note it as column E29 through to 108 is one of your sample columns. Holding Control then allows you to add an additional column as an input. It's important to note that with this particular version of DataSnipper, whatever you input as in this section, section 1, you do have to be actually using in your test. The input is going to be used in the test. So you can't just highlight the whole table. You have to only highlight what is going to be useful in this particular test. So you've highlighted column E, column F. It's also, again, hold down Control and highlight in your total, your transaction total, E, F, and H. Because we've included the row 29, that header row, we're going to tick the box which says first row includes headers and click on next. This then moves us into the next phase of our document matching setup, where we need to select which documents we are going to be actually tracing our sample information to. By default, we have the all documents section, which sometimes might be useful, but 9 times out of 10, you want to be specific with DataSnipper to make it clear what you are actually trying to trace this through to. So in my instance, I want to trace these documents through to the invoices. And remember, when we loaded those documents, we loaded them specifically to the invoices group. So I can use those documents folders and select that, that invoices group. I realized I did actually by mistake load those to the confirmations, so I'll fix that in a second. But for now, let's select that invoices group and we can click on next. Now let's go back into the organize. I'm just going to quickly reclassify these items. So I'm going to go into those confirmations, select all of them, and just simply drag and drop those into my invoices. It's as simple as that. I've now moved those out of the confirmations, which is now why they aren't visible anymore, and I put them into my invoices group. Nice and easy. And I'll just need to go back to step 2, selecting that invoices, now notes that as 5, and back to step 3. My apologies for any confusion there. That was a small mistake on my side, but you can see it's quite easy to fix. At this stage, the setup is showing in step 3 of my document matching based on what I have input in step 1 and step 2. So step 1, I input my my sample data, my columns E, F, and H, then comes through as my first column. And then the subsequent columns are the groups of documents that I want to test this to. In this case, my invoices group. So we've got that set up. What I need to now do is make sure that the letters that are showing in the main portion of my table are then appropriate based on the setup of my working paper. So you can see we've given you a working paper which has the reference, date, and transaction total coming through in columns P, Q, and R. That's what we expect the output to be showing in. So let's update that. The reference needs to come through in column P, and you can do this quite fast by just typing the letter P and hitting enter. The date needs to come through in column Q. So again, typing the letter Q and enter. Transaction total needs to come through in column R. Once you've set this up, the information is then all set up appropriately for you, and you can hit the blue button at the bottom bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which says match all rows. All right. Just in case that you also see a kind of blank pop-up that comes through, if you hit tab, that's going to then view that for you. It's one of the behind-the-scenes challenges with Excel side. That'll then pop up with your viewer, and we can then click on OK, and we're now going to review the information that comes through. So DataSnipper found the information that we were looking for our sample. You can see that we were able to find the invoice number, the date, and that amount for this particular sampled item, which means that that date is therefore appropriate in the age analysis and that amount is appropriate. Same thing for that second sample item. Zooming out so I can see all of that at once. You can see that the information comes through quite nicely. Continuing on for sample 3, same idea. And if you continue scrolling, you can see sometimes for some reason other information pops up, even though this wasn't sampled. To briefly explain why that is the case, DataSnipper is saying found the 30th of November. If you scroll to the left-hand side, you can see that that is because the date of this particular sample item, transaction, it wasn't a sample item, the date of this particular transaction is the 30th of November. And DataSnipper doesn't know that you have and haven't sampled some particular items at this stage. So it has correctly identified that the date has been found in the information you asked it to. Now, that's okay. You could manually delete that if you wanted to, but you could also assist in the document matching settings to make that a little bit clearer. If we go back into document matching, you can see that we have these 3 dots. Now, if you click on those 3 dots, that's going to show you the more advanced features that come through in the DataSnipper settings. And as an example, that reference column, the invoice number, if we make that a mandatory field, what this means is DataSnipper will not snip anything unless it finds that reference number. So it's first going to look for the invoice number or the reference number. And only if it finds that invoice number will there be subsequent testing on the documents. So you can select that as a mandatory field, which then means that these items where no reference number was found are then not going to be snipped. You can click match all rows. We'll delete that old data, and DataSnipper will then complete that work. You can see now there's no snips coming through here, but all the sample items where that reference number was found, DataSnipper then subsequently does test the remaining items. At this stage, we have then tested all of my sample items. If we scroll back up to my procedures, you can see I is then completed. We have agreed the sample items to the invoice, and we've confirmed the correct date. So it means we can complete procedure B, where we want to recalculate the aging buckets. This is a kind of approach where we now have confirmed that this date is appropriate, the transaction total is appropriate. Is that amount then shown in the correct bucket? And we have a nice fancy formula for you in column S to perform that work. This is just normal Excel functionality, so I'm not going to spend too much time looking into that, but it is quite a fun formula to work through if you are into Excel formulas like I am. So please feel free to spend some time taking a look at that. If you take a look though, you can see all of them are noted as AA, which means they have all been aged appropriately according to that formula. And you can make those nice and neat by changing the color to that nice teal, turquoise, green, blue. I don't know what color we're actually looking at, but if you change that color, which makes it a little bit easier on the eye for your reviewer, and your reviewer now can very easily see that you've received that age analysis. They can actually view that age analysis by clicking on that link. They can see that you have tested the reliability of this by casting, cross-casting, agreeing to the trial balance, and selecting a sample of items to trace that through to validate that the aging of your data age analysis is actually appropriate. At this stage, we have completed step 1, and we need to continue on to steps 2 through to 6. I'm going to close my current document. While I close that, if you do have any questions, please feel free to pose those. But we're closing this current document, which means if you have also lost me at any stage, you can catch back up by moving on to the next working paper, which is number B, or letter B. So we're going to open up training B, easy cheesy AR procedures B. Just quickly taking a look at the questions. Yeah, I do see my colleague is working through these questions at the moment, so thank you very much, Rodrigo. One quick question is around the download file. So if you are struggling to find the information so you can pick along, those are included number 1 in the meeting invitation. So in your Outlook or your Gmail or whatever calendar you are working with, there is a link directly in there. Otherwise, Rodrigo, if you could please also load those again into the chat, that would be appreciated. All right, let's then continue on. So we're picking up exactly where we left off. It's not a new working paper. This is just allowing you to catch back up if you have lost me along the way. At this stage, we have finished section 1, and we're going to be doing steps 2 and 3. Now, in the same way where earlier I made it clear that DataSnipper doesn't do sampling, steps 2 is sampling. So we're not going to be spending much time looking at how we sample. I do want to reiterate that the sample size calculation and the selection of that sample size needs to still align with your own firm's methodology and your own firm's approach. So we're not going to be looking at that in detail, but it is useful to understand how this particular working paper we have sampled the items. So if you recall, in step 1, we received our debtors age analysis at an invoice level. So customer A has 2 transactions on this debtors age analysis. Customer B has 3 transactions on this debtors age analysis. And that's going to be useful for us a little bit later. But for this first step, where we want to trace items through to the debtors confirmations, we probably want to do that more at a debtor level. The debtor is more likely to confirm their year-end balance as opposed to each individual line item that they owe. So what we did, we took the debtors age analysis, and if you go to tab 2, you can see that we have actually pivoted that to present that at a debtor level. So where customer A previously had 2 transactions, now customer A is showing as one total value of 9068.50. If you go back to number A, you can see that that is equal to the total of the transactions for customer A. So it's just a pivot. At this stage, you then apply your own firm's methodology, and you select the sample, and you can see that we've given you that sample of 7 of the debtors. That's debtor A, B, F, G, K, N, and P. And we're going to be using this for the next procedure. But I also just want to tie this back to at the invoice level. If you go back to your first tab and you scroll all the way to the right-hand side, you can see that we've got a column in column T to double check, is this particular transaction included within your debtor sample? So for example, debtor A was sampled and debtor B was sampled. So all of debtor A and B's transactions are then included within that sample, as we can see. And you can see if you filter on that section by the sample, there are 22 transactions for the 7 debtors that you have sampled. I hope that hasn't confused you by the jumping back and forth. Reasonably normal concept, just jumping back and forth can be a little bit disconcerting. All right, so we've got our sample of debtors, and we're going to go to procedure number 3. So if you navigate to the 3rd tab, you can see we have a highlighted section in yellow. This is going to be the focus of DataSnipper's functionality, where we want to agree the sampled receivables amount to the positive confirmations received directly from the debtors. And again, just reiterating, the way that you're probably going to do debtors confirmations is asking the debtor to confirm the year-end balance. Just means that you don't have to have as large of a sample size because the values of those are going to be slightly larger. So we have the 7 debtors that we've selected, and we've sent those confirmations through to the client. We ask them to confirm the closing balance at year end, so column E, and we also included a confirmation reference just for our own purposes, which we have in column F. If you then navigate through to your DataSnipper icon and click on Organize, we're going to now load in the information which you receive back from your clients. So go to your confirmations folder, which we've given you, and you're going to import the confirmations documents. So again, those are nicely located within the folder B, confirmations. You can see we can load in the confirmations for customer H, K, and N. Click on OK. That will load those in. And again, you can see the status of all these items. For me, those are noted as OCR. Just in case I realize yours might be slightly different, if yours has not run OCR, you can select all of those and click on the button at the top portion which says OCR, and then DataSnipper will run an additional layer of text recognition over these documents. You can click on OK. We're going to close our document viewer. We now have those documents included. Let's quickly familiarize ourselves with the confirmations and the layout of these particular confirmations. So you can see if you zoom in on the confirmation in your document viewer, we've got a confirmation for AR4, that's the reference, for customer H. And it says here, dear customer H, our auditors, DataSnipper, are currently auditing our financial statements. To facilitate this audit, please confirm that the total amount outstanding, as shown in our records, due as of 31st of the 12th, 2022, equal to, and then they give an amount. Could you please send signed confirmations directly to our auditors at this email address? And they give an email address, warm regards, our client's CFO. And then we have the actual confirmation below that, where the debtor is then saying the amount shown in our records as at 31st December 2022 is equal to, and we have the value that they are confirming, their signature, their role, and their date. So the confirmation portion of this document is the second portion of that confirmation document. That's important to note, and we'll see that in a second. But what we have now is we have the information included in Excel, and we have the information we want to verify that against in the supporting evidence, which is the perfect scenario for using document matching. So let's click on document matching and see how that's going to work. Again, we're going to click on the top right-hand corner, start new document matching. It's a very similar approach to previously, so we're going to slowly speed up. The first section is to select your sample data, highlighting those areas. We're going to be selecting the sample data being the closing balance and that confirmation reference, columns E and columns F. And again, because I've included my header, I can select first row includes headers. Click on next. Again, we want to use specific document folders and tell DataSnipper to look through the confirmation documents only when it's performing this procedure, and we can click on next. The final step is to teach DataSnipper where to output these results. So if it finds the closing balance in that confirmation, it needs to output that somewhere, and based on the setup that we have designed in this particular working paper, you can see that balance should come through in columns I. Let's update that to column I. That confirmation reference should come through in column F. It's important, sorry, not column F, column J. Got a little bit lost there for a second. It's important to note that as you set up document matching and you set your working paper templates, the linkage between your document matching settings and your logical presentation of your work makes sense. You want things to be neatly laid out in your Excel as you would want to present that to an auditor and to a reviewer, and therefore your document matching needs to align with that. So that just takes you a second to update. Once you've updated that, you can then click on the button which says match all rows, and DataSnipper will perform the work that you have asked it to. You can click on OK, and let's investigate that. So you can see we've only matched 3 particular items. And if you click on that first item for customer H, DataSnipper was able to find that balance, and it found the confirmation reference. But if we remember how we understand and interpret this particular document, the balance that DataSnipper has snipped is not actually the data's confirmation. That is the client asking the data to confirm that value. The data's confirmation comes through as that second iteration. It's important that you do still apply your own professional judgment when investigating and understanding the information that has been presented. To understand why DataSnipper snipped the incorrect item, ultimately it's not an artificially intelligent tool. And so what it does is it tries to find the best match. And the way it identifies the best match is locationally. So you can see that we're looking for AR4 and the number. And those two snips are the closest together. Therefore, we're going to snip those two together. The second number is actually further away from the AR4 and therefore less likely to be correct from DataSnipper's best snipping methodology kind of idea. Don't worry, you are still in control and you have the ability to manually adjust this. You have a couple options at your disposal. You could always delete that snip. So clicking on the button which says delete snips and then create your own snip again, that will then update that. I could instead, let me just undo that, say it was still the old one. I could instead just drag and drop that. So resizing this and placing this anywhere is going to update the text that gets displayed. And therefore I can just drag that to the correct amount that I want it to be shown. And that will then update that. So you can manually adjust that. This then means that you spend a little bit of time as the preparer making sure that the information is appropriate, so that when this working paper is finalized and your reviewer opens this up, they are going to be directed to the correct source and cell location of this particular document. Now it's important that we don't forget the manual portions of this procedure. So we're wanting to check what is the date that this document was signed. We can bring this in with a manual validation, a manual text snip. You can see it was signed on the 1st of the 23rd. And then we want to bring in whether or not this document has been signed in total. So we can probably use our validation snip to confirm that and create a cross-reference to the source of that. So that means as a reviewer of this particular working paper, I'm directed directly to where we have validated that this data has confirmed the value. Let's do that for the remaining two items. You can see that second item, luckily DataSnipper did identify the correct amount, so we're good. And we're going to again extract that date and the validation snip over the signature. That third item unfortunately has the incorrect amount, so we're just going to manually update that to the second portion of the number, bringing in that date and bringing in the signature. So it just takes you a second or two to make sure that all the snips are appropriate. DataSnipper's document matching feature helps you identify the correct snips and the correct locations of these documents. And then you just take a second to manually run through that, apply your professional judgment, and bring in some additional manual checks. We've got some nice Excel formulas to check that the amounts are actually correct and to see if we have therefore received sufficient audit evidence to test the validation and existence assertions. You can see that we have got that for 3 of our 7 sampled items. So we can change that to a nice blue color to be easier on the eye. This then makes it clear that we still need to perform some additional procedures for those remaining 4 debtors. And that's exactly what we were going to do. We're going to continue on in working paper C. So if you have lost me at these stages, we're going to close this document and pick up where we left off. This is also your opportunity to pose any questions, and I will then pause for questions in that space. Yeah, I see that there aren't any questions at this point in time. All right, once you've opened up the third working paper, let's pause on that. We're going to have a quick stretch, make sure that we are comfortable and ready to continue on. We only have 2 more, so we're about halfway through today's session. we're going to do a quick energizer. My first question for you is, in which country do you think fortune cookies were invented? Which country do you think fortune cookies were invented? There's a poll launching for you. Let me know what you think. Reasonable responses. All right, pretty good, pretty good. So the correct answer is, looks like most participants are getting the correct answer. San Francisco, USA was the country that invented fortune cookies. Super interesting one. And next question for us is, which country consumes the most chocolates? Which country consumes the most chocolates? Is that Denmark, Switzerland, or Austria? Again, it looks like most people know these answers. I think they're a little bit too easy. Gonna need to find more complicated questions to ask on these webinars. But yes, the correct answer, everybody, is Switzerland. Switzerland is the country that consumes the most chocolates. They also, in my opinion, have the best chocolate. I'm sorry for anyone that disagrees. I have the mic today. All right, continuing on, let's head back over to our working paper. So we're in the third working paper, procedure C. We're going to be picking up where we left off. So we've just finished our confirmations testing for the debtors. We've realized that 4 of our debtors did not confirm their year-end values. This doesn't necessarily mean that they do not exist and the value is not appropriate. It just means that they maybe aren't as responsive to the emails that they receive. So we need to perform some additional procedures to close out in this audit financial statement area. And we're going to be heading off to our 4-5 tab. So open out that particular tab. We're going to be specifically focusing on the point 4, where confirmations are not received, trace to subsequent receipts. So we actually want to now trace the bank statement and see had these debtors actually paid post year end. This is why it was important for us to receive the debtors age analysis at an invoice level. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the working paper, I want to, and in fact, let me stop sharing for a second so we can focus not on the screen. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the actual working paper, it's important to understand how payments in real life with a debtor actually occurs. We often try to make it a little bit easier and say the customer is going to pay the year-end value, and therefore we just trace the year-end value to the bank statement. Now, realistically, that debtor, they owe 3, 4, 5 transactions as at year-end, and then they might transact again post-year-end. And at some point, they're going to make a payment. And that payment amount might be for one of those transactions, for 2 of them, for all of them, all the ones before year end, maybe some of the ones post year end. In real life, the value that you see on the bank statement, the date that you see on the bank statement, and the reference that you see on the bank statement, it's not going to be super easy to tie up to the debtor or even necessarily to the actual invoice. You usually need something, some form of evidence in between your debtor's age analysis and the bank statements so that you can link that data. And that's what we're going to be doing in the next step or two. I'm just going to share my screen again. All right. So let's familiarize ourselves with what we have. Column D, E, and F, and I suppose G as well. It is presenting the items at the debtor level again. So you can see customer A comes through twice, but that closing value is still the total closing value that customer A paid or owed at year end. So customer A still needs to confirm. You can see, for example, customer H, there are 3 transactions, but they confirm the year-end value. So we've already picked that the valuation in existence for customer H is completed. Then in columns H, I, and J, we want to bring in the details of this particular debtor. So you can see for customer A, they have 2 invoices. We have the date of those invoices, and we have the invoice amount coming through. So yeah, we have a total there of 9068. and that agrees to the closing value that comes through in column E for that particular customer. So all we're doing is we're now presenting the sample at an invoice level. Now we want to agree that item, those invoices, through to the bank statement and see have these been paid. But like I just said, it's very unlikely that the debtor is going to make nice, neat payments for the exact amount, noting the correct invoice number and the correct invoice amount. If you're lucky, that'll be amazing. But realistically, a lot of clients are a little bit more confusing than that. So we have this interim section, columns K, L, and M, where we want to do a tie between from our invoice level age analysis and our bank statements. You can see that this is a VLOOKUP. And so we're going to go to the source of this VLOOKUP. This is in in tab A. So if you navigate through to tab A, you can see that we've got a table snip of data for you. Let's open that up and we'll see what we have. So this is a piece of information that your client has provided you. So you obviously need to specifically request this. And this is the payment allocation listing. Essentially, whenever your client receives a payment into their bank account, they need to allocate that payment to information that they expect to be receiving. So you can see if we take a look at those first three items, the client has received one payment with a reference cust P. That is the reference that they see on the bank statement on the date 19th of January for the amount of 8,177. They then go and allocate that to three invoices, which come through in the the second last column, and the invoice values are shown in that last column. Let's close that and work with that in Excel instead. We've table snipped this. So you can see again, we've got those three items on that particular date for that amount, and that is then allocating these three transactions. You can see the total value of those three transactions is 8,177. That is then being allocated for that one payment. This is a process that pretty much every client has to do based on receiving information into the bank statement. They need to allocate that to the invoices that they expect to be receiving. And so this piece of information is something that you should be able to receive from your clients. We have received this. Using this, we then tie the information back using a nice VLOOKUP to see whether or not this particular invoice has been included in that allocation listing and therefore has been paid. If it has been paid, what is the batch reference number that you expect to see on the bank statement? What is the payment date? And what is that payment amount? And now at this stage, we have information that we expect to see in the bank statement. We can't, however, just trust that the client's allocation is actually correct. We still need to trace that through to the bank statement. And that's what we're going to do now in columns N, O, P, and Q. The information we have in Excel, and we want to validate this to something outside of Excel. Once those facts are in play, we're always going to be thinking document matching. Let's click on the Organize button to load in that bank statement. You can see that we have a button for bank statement. We can, a folder for bank statement, making sure you're in your bank statements folder. You can import your bank statement. That will load in your bank statement, making sure that you run optical character recognition on that. So the status should say OCR. You can click on OK. That then notes that particular document has been loaded, and we can then click on document matching and run through our three-step process. Top right-hand corner, our blue button, start new document matching. We're going to be selecting your sample data. So let's select those three items in columns K, L, and M all the way down. First row includes headers because row 14 is the header. We're going to be using those document folders from step 2. And we're going to use the bank statement. That's the document that we want DataSnipper to look into. We can click on next. And then finally, we want to output these results. You can see we want to output the reference number in column N, which is already correctly noted, the receipt date in column O, and that payment amount in column P. So everything is nicely set up already for you, and you can click on match all rows. DataSnipper will then perform that work, and you can click on OK. Can now see that this particular invoice, you can see for customer A, that particular invoice has been noted to be to have a confirmation reference of, luckily in this instance, that invoice number, We have the payment date and we have the payment total amount. And that detail was then traced to the bank statement, where we see that invoice number coming through with the correct date and the correct amount. And you would be able to manually cycle through these documents to note the correct information is coming through each time and that the correct snips have been applied. This then confirms that that particular transaction for that selected sampled debtor has been paid post year end, and therefore validation and existence has been ticked. At this stage, you have tested either through debtor's confirmation or tracing to subsequent receipts most of these transactions, and you can now again change that to a nice color to make it easy on the eye. This also makes it a lot clearer to you as a reviewer that you have one item which still has not been validated. For some reason, this debtor both didn't confirm that value and also has not yet paid for this particular transaction. This is going to require some further investigation. Let's perform those next couple of steps, and we're going to do this again in our final working paper D. So I'm going to close my working paper and not save it. And let's go back to D. If you do have any questions, you can pose those now. See again, Rodrigo is nicely addressing those questions. But if you do have anything that does need to be addressed live, please let me know. Opening up number D, we're going to take a look at this working paper. Okay. All right, so we've been doing very well so far. Just as a brief recap, we have selected our age analysis and we have confirmed that we can use that as evidence, or sorry, not as evidence, as a starting point in our testing, because we tested the information prepared by the entity and we agreed that to supporting evidence from a sample test point of view. We then sampled that and we traced that through to positive confirmations, and then we also traced the transaction level of those through to the bank statements. And we're left with one transaction which still has not been confirmed. So we're going to now perform procedure 5, where no subsequent receipts have been received, discuss with the client when payment is expected, and consider whether an allowance for doubtful debts is required. So let's navigate through to tab 4 and 5. Scrolling down to the bottom, you can see our focus is now on procedure 5. Scrolling down to the bottom, you can see that we have the investigation included over here. Now, it's important to know DataSnipper doesn't do this investigation for you. And it's an amazing tool, and it would be amazing if we could run a full audit with DataSnipper, but we have not yet revolutionized to that point. We do still require the level of expertise and investigation skill that you have as the auditor. So you would be required to do that investigation and figure out what went wrong here. Why is this data not confirming the value? And that's what we're doing here. DataSnipper simply helps you with the documentation of that and making it clear what exactly is happening here. It improves the quality of your documentation and therefore streamlines that review process. So the total amount that was not confirmed is that 222.98. Brief discussion here. So upon further investigation and discussion with Easy Cheesy's financial manager, it was noted that customer B has disputed that invoice, as the cheese was delivered was the incorrect order. Email correspondence between customer B and Easy Cheesy was inspected in order to verify this information. And you could stop there. You could have worded that in your working paper, and that could be sufficient. However, with DataSnipper, you can also bring that email in as audit evidence and reference directly to that, just adding an additional layer of value and quality to the documentation that you are presenting. So let's do that. Clicking on DataSnipper, you can click on import this time, because we're not going to put that in the folder. We're just going to import that. And we're going to import those further investigations. You can see that this is actually an Outlook item. So this is actually the email. We have received that email from our client, and we want to import that. DataSnipper will then import that email and convert it to a PDF so that we can interact with it within DataSnipper or within Excel. We can then see the email and we can extract the key pieces that we might require. So I'm actually going to use a validation snip in this instance, but the idea is you have all those manual snipping features at your disposal to improve the quality of the documentation in your work. So as an example here, I want to make it clear that there has been an email. The email came from customer B, so I'm going to create a validation snip over customer B. Holding down control then lets me create more than one cross-reference. So customer B sent an email. They queried one of the invoices, namely that invoice. So I'm making clear that this email relates to this particular transaction. And why did they query it? They said they did not accept delivery. Those are the key pieces of information that I might want to draw the attention to for this particular work. Now, if I click on cell D44, it's going to take me straight to the source of this information, and I can then navigate between all of my snips. So making it nice and clear what is the relevant information for the documentation of my audit work. By default, we have that green V because we've used a validation snip. But once you have created a snip within Excel, you can then use Excel's normal functionality. So I might want to now change this to be more specific and maybe say see email linked. And then it links me straight to that location. You have that that functionality at your disposal. It's really improving the quality of that documentation. Then at this stage, you have at your disposal how you would like to proceed. You might decide to select an additional sample. You might decide this is clearly trivial, move on. Depending on your methodology, depending on the client's risk profile, depending on multiple different things, your next couple steps would be different. So please don't take this as me teaching you how you should then proceed with an exception like this. But as an example of the next steps, we would then try and identify if this is an isolated incident or not. So based on the inspection of the complaints register between August and Jan 27, so around year end, this is seen to be an isolated incident. So we didn't need to extrapolate it. And therefore, the total value from our sample selected is going to be that 222, which is still pretty trivial. We don't perform any further work. It's an example of how that might be wrapped up. Now, it's important. We have now finished all the testing for the existence and the valuation of the actual balance at year end. So the value that we expect or that we want the client to pay. But we haven't yet taken into account the allowance for doubtful debts. So that's going to be point number 6. If you go to that tab over there, we're going to open up that allowance for doubtful debts work. Here we're going to be performing these particular procedures. So obtain the authorized policy relating to the measurement of allowance for doubtful debts, and firstly, assess the policy for reasonability. And then secondly, recalculate the bad debts allowance based on the reasonable and authorized policy. Again, I want to reiterate, this is usually a more complicated area of your audit approach. It's usually a higher risk area of your audit. As soon as you have management judgment and bias, these are really the areas that you probably should be focusing on and applying more of your time to. DataSnipper is not going to do that work for you, but it will assist you in the documentation and the quality of your documentation. Yeah. So let's see how we can use that. That first step is to obtain the client's policy. So let's actually load those in. You can click on import. You can see we've got a folder for policy. Let's load in the policy. You can see we've actually got 2 different documents. We've got the AR policy, and then we've also got an email, which is the policy that was applied specifically for this year. We'll see that in a sec. And you click on OK. You can see the policies have now been loaded into your document viewer. What we're doing here is we're actually just linking to the information. The policy itself, we're going to create a validation snip and link ourselves to the policy heading. And we want to note that this policy has been authorized, so we can create a validation snip over that signature. Then we want to bring in the specifics of what this policy says. So we can use that text snip to bring in the full paragraph. So really speeds up how fast it takes for you to extract that information from your supporting evidence, your PDF, straight into your Excel. By default, we do apply specific formatting. So that's going to be one long text. But again, once that is included within your Excel, you can edit that and the way that gets presented. So we can then maybe wrap that text, maybe change the size of that a little bit, and make the size of that a little bit larger. We now have the policy, and if you give that a quick read, you can see it's actually very generic. Easy cheesy determines on each reporting date the impairment of trade and other receivables using a model, for example, the flow rate method, which estimates the lifetime expected credit losses that will be incurred on these receivables. Individually significant financial assets are tested for impairment on an individual basis, and then the remaining financial assets are assessed collectively in groups that share similar credit risk characteristics. So that sounds all very nice, and they seem to be doing approximately the right thing in terms of what the IFRS standards would expect. But there's no specifics. You aren't able to really assess how that was actually applied this year. But luckily for us, our client has also been more specific in a message, so we can navigate through the allowance for doubtful debts. And you can see we've got 2022 policy application, which is then an email, and we're just going to reference this as well. So using DataSnipper's features, creating those validation snips, you can see that we have an allowance for doubtful debts policy, and we want to check that this has been authorized. So again, we can reference the fact that the financial manager, Sharon Colby, has actually actioned this and sent this email. We want to bring in the key details. This is actually quite a lengthy email. We want to make sure that we're not overwhelming the documentation in our working paper and any reviewer, but keep pointing to the specific relevant sections of this work. Let's use some text snips and do that exact thing. You can see we've got a first section which says all individually significant accounts with a year-end value greater than 10,000 must be specifically tested for impairment on an individual basis. So now we're being a little more specific. What types of transactions are we going to specifically test? Transactions greater than 10,000. We've extracted that full sentence, but we can probably even summarize that further, and we can actually change that to transactions or specifically test transactions greater than 10K. That summarizes and makes it a little bit easier to review at the working paper level, but you haven't lost the source of that information. So at any point, if I click on that cell, I'm going to still be taken to the detail that comes through in that email to make sure that my interpretation as the preparer is actually appropriate. The next section, let's continue on. Therefore, we will group the remaining debtors based on similar to credit risk characteristics and a consistent write-off percentage applied. I performed a preliminary assessment of our debtors profile and determined that all debtors within the same industry are within the same industry and are subject to the same credit risks. Not aware of any debtors who may be subject to specific credit risk, which differs from all other debtors. And then Sharon is asking the debtors team, please could you perform an assessment of your debtors to assess if there have been any changes in credit risk, or if any of your debtors are subject to additional or less credit risk. Please focus this attention on debtors who have outstanding payments greater than 90 days. This is quite nice. It sounds like the debtor or our client is actually applying quite a detailed approach towards their debtors age analysis assessment. So that's quite good. Again, that's quite a lot of information, so we might want to summarize that once we have extracted that or cross-reference to that. So we can summarize that and say all debtors have similar credit risk profiles and no changes year on year. All right. We summarized that quite nicely, making it a lot easier for me to read this as a run through, but we haven't lost the detail in this documentation. And then we have general approach we will follow is to write off based on the aging of the debtors. So they're going to use that aging profile that we tested earlier. And they've got a 3-year rolling average write-off policy. Note the following write-off criteria. They've applied the last 3 years policy write-off categorization to this year's allowance for doubtful debts. And then we have, it looks like we've lost that detail that comes through. But if you scroll down, any images included within the email are going to be coming through at the bottom of that screen. So we do still have those images coming through. We'll use that in a second. And then any additional credit risk and forward-looking indicators can be applied to these write-off percentages. However, I believe that this past data is likely the best representation of those estimates. This looks like quite a nice policy and application for the current year. Let's then bring in those aging categories that the client has used. We can use that table snip. And you might notice at this stage it says, do you want to run OCR to enhance the text quality of imported documents? Remember when we loaded this in, we didn't run OCR. So DataSnipper is then just asking us and prompting us. We're trying to snip something which is not currently recognizing as text. Let's run that text recognition so we can fix that. And then reattempt for the table snip. We're going to bring in a snip over that table. DataSnipper will try and identify the correct columns. You can see we've actually missed one of those columns. And you can manually update that by clicking on the plus icon just above there, which will then add an additional column. You can also click on those 3 dots and edit those rows. You can see that we have correctly identified there are 2 rows included here. Then if you take a look at your working paper, you can then obviously play with that, make that a little bit prettier to bring in that age analysis appropriately. We then need to assess the reasonability of this. We've extracted the detail. You would then need to do quite a detailed assessment in terms of whether or not the client's policy and their approach to the debtors age analysis, is that reasonable? We're not going to do that here. That requires quite a lot of subjectivity and quite a lot of documentation. But let's pretend like we have concluded that the policy and the percentages applied are seen to be reasonable. We can use them for the calculation. What we're going to do then is bring in those aging totals from tab 1. Remember back in the beginning, we tested that correct aging with our aging tests over here to see whether or not these buckets were appropriate. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom of this section, you then have the total for those aging buckets. You can then use those and the policy, so those come through as the first line item. You can then use those as well as that policy, which we've just assessed to be reasonable, to determine what is the correct write-off amount. We're now recalculating the write-off amount based on what we deem to be a reasonable policy and a correct age analysis. This then calculates a total write-off amount. We would then compare that to the trial balance and hope that there's no differences. And luckily for us, there are no differences in this particular instance, and we are happy because we can tell the client that we can sign off this financial statement area. That then concludes our work for debtors age analysis. We have performed a full assessment of the actual balance, tracing that through to the debtors confirmations as well as subsequent receipts. Remember, there was a little bit of complexity around the subsequent receipts. We go back to step 4 because we had to do that interim step to see what is the batch payments that might come through for these particular transactions. Once we tested that, we then needed to do that step back and assist in testing the allowance for doubtful debts. And we saw how the manual snipping features can really improve the quality of your documentation through that process. So now as a reviewer, if I receive this working paper, I'm quite happy because it's very easy for me to read through this document, validate the key pieces of information that have been referenced, and then sign off this audit financial statement area as a concluded set of working papers. That then concludes today's click-along portion of the discussion. I do want to allow for any questions. But before we do that, quick discussions on what's next. We do have events and webinars pretty much every week Friday. So if you do want to sign up for some upcoming events and webinars similar to today's session, we try to make them quite industry specific, quite targeted towards a particular financial statement area or risk area, really trying to see how we can bring in DataSnipper's features into your particular audit approach. We are starting to also bring in more internal audits and control-based testing kind of ideas. So if you do have departments that might benefit from that, please can you point them to those? It might be useful for them. Our knowledge base is also a good place for you to go and check out some of the features and the elements that might be useful in your approaches. And within Excel, you can also always sign up for the learning track. I do recall that most people on today's call are quite familiar with DataSnipper's features. But if you do want a reminder for any section, if you click on Learn and then sign up for the learning track, that'll then give you a couple items each week to run through. Are there any questions at this stage? We do have a couple minutes to ask any questions and to pose any answers. You can ask me anything, DataSnipper related and accounts receivable related. Let me know. If there are no questions, then I will hang on for a couple more minutes, but I do want to thank you all very much for joining in today's session. I will launch a quick poll on requesting some feedback from everybody. So if you could let me know how this training session landed for you, where the areas that I'm doing particularly well, where the areas that I might be able to improve. I personally do quite value that feedback, and I really would I really aim to improve the way that I give these trainings and how it lands for everybody. For those that are hopping off the call, thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it, and I hope that today has been useful. And if you do want to ask any questions, I will be here for the next couple minutes.